I'm Clare Mackintosh, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Hahn,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Clare Mackintosh.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into Author Stories. I really appreciate you tuning in to each and every episode. You know that you can subscribe to the show over at hankgarner.com. There's some handy links in the right-hand sidebar to help you do that, so you never miss an episode. And I really hope you're enjoying the content that we're bringing you, and it's because of our wonderful sponsors that we're able to bring you the author interviews that we do each and every day. Some new sponsors this month: Holly Heisey Designs. Authors, you have just a few seconds when someone is browsing for your book on Amazon or one of the other bookstores to make that impression. Holly is one of the very best cover designers, and her designs will make your book stand out from the crowd. Go visit her at Holly Heisey Design. There's a link to it in the show notes. Also, A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson. We're going to be talking a lot about this book coming up. A military sci-fi political thriller set a short decade from now. And you're going to love this book. This is a brand new book by a brand new author, and he's doing some really, really awesome stuff. Go pick up a copy of A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1, and go support this first-time author. He's doing some really great stuff. I'm going to be telling you more about it in the next few days. Also, thank you to Chuck Buda for sponsoring the show. There's some links to his work in the show notes as well. And at the end of the show, as always, we're going to have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Thanks for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Clare Mackintosh on the line with me. Clare has a brand new book out called Let Me Lie that is amazing. I think you guys are going to love this book so much. If you love thrillers the way I do, you are going to just eat this book up. Welcome to the show, Clare.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
It is a good question. Well, like most writers I know, I have always written and always wanted to tell stories. I remember getting a certificate for excellent creative writing when I would have been maybe 5 or 6, maybe 7 at a push, and I've got I don't remember very much about my primary school, but I do remember clutching that certificate and coming out of school feeling incredibly proud. So I think perhaps that is my earliest memory of thinking this is something that makes me happy.
I love that. Was there a teacher that had any particular impact on you around that time that maybe encourage that or anything like that? I've
had so many teachers over the years who have been so brilliant. When I was in secondary school, so I was in my sort of mid-teens, I had an English teacher called Mrs. Calverley, who's actually gone on to, she has written a memoir herself about her time during the Second World War. And she was an incredible English teacher and introduced me to so many different books, and used to run a creative writing session at lunchtime, just in her free time, for a few of us girls who enjoyed it. So I will always be grateful to her.
I love that. I've heard so many. I ask that question as often as I can when I think there might be something there, because I've heard so many stories of that one particular person who that encourages someone, notices something in a kid or something, and just gives that little piece of encouragement that does nothing for the teacher, but it actually changes a student's life, and you can kind of put your finger on a trajectory change in someone's life. It's so powerful. I love to hear those stories.
It is, absolutely. I'm really conscious of it with my own kids now.
Right.
Of encouraging them and making sure that no one ever stamps on their creativity, because it's easy. Whilst it's also easy to inspire someone, it's easy to put out a spark.
Exactly.
By denting someone's confidence. And so, whilst I don't want my kids to sort of be told constantly that they're geniuses, they're far from that.
Right.
It's great to just foster creativity and help build confidence.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's definitely a difference in coddling a child, and, giving encouragement where encouragement is needed. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So we could talk parenting and child rearing all day, but, as with most writers, who, even though you were always a storyteller, you did not pursue that as your primary career first off. As most writers don't. I think a lot of us go out and we get some other life experience and we pursue other fields, and the storytelling thing is in the back of our head somewhere. But what did you decide to do as a career?
Well, I joined the police, which was perhaps an unusual career for someone who wanted to be a writer. But I never realized, I never saw writing as a proper job. It didn't seem like something ordinary people did. I didn't have those role models around me. So I just carried on keeping writing as something that I did for me. And policing was what I did to pay the bills. And I really loved it. I loved being a police officer. It also really did not feel in my way from now, because being an officer actually isn't something I or just although that's very much of the job. It's finding the story. And so when you're a detective, which I interviewing people being victims of crime, and they don't tell you their story in a hero way. They don't start at the beginning and go through a narrative arc. They tell it to you in bundles. And your job as a detective is to pull out the narrative threads that turn into a coherent account that is compelling enough for a judge to convict someone. And so actually, all through my police career, what I was doing was telling the stories of people who had been victims of crime, or people who had witnessed crimes, or, of course, the stories of people who had committed crimes.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you were saying, that going into police work on the surface may seem like a million miles away from being a writer, but I think you put it way more succinctly than I could. The learning how to unravel a story so that then you can tell the story in an engaging way. I think that's a perfect skill for becoming a writer. Right,
and not even just a crime writer.
Right.
I think there's a lot of people that I talk to who assume that the reason my job was useful is because I know how to talk authentically about investigations. And of course, that's useful, and it's useful to understand forensics and, how evidence is gathered. But it's definitely, it's the storytelling and it's the people watching that have been the most useful to me.
Well, and we watch television programs, maybe like Blue Bloods or Law and Order or something like that, where they have, in essence, 40, 2 minutes or whatever to tell an entire story arc, and the detectives are going out and they're gathering information, and it comes just one fact after another, and they piece it together, and it's not like that at all, is it?
No. Do you know, I think real policing actually is so dull compared to what we read. And I'm always struck by how clever criminals are when we either watch police dramas on TV, read crime fiction. They're always criminal masterminds, aren't they? Incredibly clever, incredibly twisty plots and dastardly, and I think 99% of the criminals I dealt with have been incredibly sick. But, hey, we write fiction.
Right. So what was the first book idea that you had? You've been working in police work and detective work for a number of years. What was the first story that captured your imagination and you said, I've got to write this as a book?
So that was a real life case. So as a rule, I don't really write about real cases. but there was a hit and run that killed a child in Oxford, where I was working as a police officer, and I really struggled with this job. So no one was ever caught for it. The guy who was behind the wheel drove off and never came forward, and I couldn't understand how somebody could live with themselves after doing something so horrific. And I found myself thinking a lot about the mother of this child and wondering how anybody could survive the death of a child. It didn't seem possible. I was 21, and this just seemed like the most horrific thing ever. And then 10 years later, I lost my own child. My son died of meningitis. And I realized then that, of course, you do keep going. You have to, but it changes you. Tragedy, grief, trauma change you. They have such a huge impact on your life. And so I started writing my debut novel, I Let You Go, about a hit and run and about the way it would impact on different people's lives in a different way.
Other than the obvious success of that book and having it published and that aspect of it changing your life, how did the writing of that book and the creative process change you as a person?
It was a very cathartic book.
I can imagine.
To write. It was a very painful book. It is like many people's first novels. It is the most autobiographical, although it's not an autobiography. But I put so much more of myself into that than either of the others. And what it did was it forced me to actually get my grief out of a box and examine it, turn it over, look at what it was, how to describe it, find words for it, which is something that I didn't let myself do, that I don't let myself do, actually. And I suspect that, because it's simply too hard, I suspect that if I hadn't have written that book, I might have come unstuck later on down the line. I think I needed to let myself grieve, and because I wasn't going to let myself do that on a personal basis, actually doing it through a character's words was the next best thing.
Claire, we hear readers often talk about a favorite book and how this book changed their life, and sometimes we think of that as being trite. But when a reader says that, they're being serious. This book really had a profound impact on them and maybe altered the trajectory of their life. What people don't consider a lot is that if you're reading a book and it has that sort of impact on you, a lot of times it had a similar impact on the writer, and you have no idea the emotional journey the writer went through to get that story onto the page.
That's a really interesting point of view, and I sort of thinking about the books that I've loved over the years, thinking about books like The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and of the many people I know who have found that book inspiring, and how interesting it would be to know the book that had a big impact on him when he wrote it.
Right. Maybe we'll have to try to get him to ask that question. That's the thing about writing that fascinates me the most is understanding why people do the thing that they do and how it impacts them. Anyway, a bit of a tangent. So Claire, what happened after the first book was published?
Well, then life changed pretty fast, really. The book, So I Let You Go, was translated into it has fallen across around, and it just changed everything. So I had a second book, which was really so pretty second now, but it really exists, and all this pressure I was thinking about, because it was definitely saying you have to make a bestseller, but nevertheless the pressure was sort of there. And in fact, I wrote a book immediately after I Let You Go that wasn't as good, and so I didn't publish it. I threw that away, which was a really tough thing to do. But I'm so glad I did it, because bringing out a second book that wasn't as strong as I Let You Go would have been a real problem for me, and very disappointing for my readers. So so I wrote instead I See You, which did go on to be my second book, and actually the pressure sort of vanished once I started writing that book because I had confidence in it from the start.
And now your third book is out, Let Me Lie. Before we talk about the book specifically, you mentioned something earlier, and you said that that first book had a lot of you in it, and that, you know, as writers we talk about that there are pieces of us in everything that we write. But does it become easier the more you write and the farther you get away from that first writing experience? Does it get easier to leave yourself out of the writing and characters become more their own? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. I think it has got easier for me. I don't think there's a huge, I don't think at all really in Let Me Lie. There are, again, there are themes of grief that run through it, and I suppose, you know, I will have drawn on personal experience to a certain extent, but really, I do think I needed that first book to get all the emotions zested. Since then, I've been focusing on my characters and who they are and how they feel. So yeah, it definitely got easier to myself.
Well, speaking of characters, tell us about Anna and the character that we first meet in Let Me Lie.
So Anna is a new mum. She is she's at a very vulnerable point when we meet her because her both her parents took their own lives, and she is struggling to come to terms with this because she feels as though they would never have willfully abandoned her. That's what she believes. She feels that their suicides were very selfish, and she can't quite believe that they did it. And so when we join her, it's the anniversary of her mum's suicide, and she receives an anonymous note which casts doubt over what happened. And for Anna, this is exactly what she's needed. This is confirmation that her parents were murdered. And so she goes to the police to convince them to reopen the case.
And as with all of your books, there are some really deep, serious themes that run through here. And we're not talking about just garden variety murder mysteries, if there's such a thing as a garden variety murder mystery. But we're dealing with great family drama and the feelings of abandonment and the subject of suicide and is that real or not? When you're kind of initially plotting or coming up with the ideas for the book, do themes surface for you in the beginning, or are those things that just come out in the writing?
They definitely come out in the writing. I haven't ever thought at the start of a book, I want to write a book about mental health, about suicide. It's the plot that comes first, plot and then characters. And then it's only really when I finish the book, certainly after the first draft, maybe even the second draft, that I can clearly see what the themes are. And that's when I might go back through on another edit and look at those themes themselves. That's when I might start to look at the language, to perhaps look at the imagery that I'm using that might reinforce the themes. But the themes themselves come out by themselves.
You said that the plot comes first and then characters. When you're thinking about a book, is there something maybe in the news, or something that catches your attention and then you start playing the what if game, or how does a plot come together for you?
Yeah, it is. It's often the what if game. This particular plot for Let Me Lie was inspired by a news story, so something that happened in the UK that I can't talk about. I'd love to because it's a fascinating crime, but I can't because it would spoil at least one of the twists. So this news story I was very aware of when it first came in, and then over the years, occasionally it would resurface, and I'd read a bit about it again, and I became really interested in it. And what interested me wasn't the main characters; it was the characters on the periphery. the family specifically, how the family were affected by this thing that had happened. And so that tends to be what happens to me is that I'll think of something that's happened and then wonder how it affected the other characters.
So when you have the plot or the situation thought out, do characters just kind of form out of the situation, or have you been kind of building characters in your mind, looking for a situation to put them in? How does that work for you?
No, I've never done that. I've never sort of started with the character and then wondered what I can do with them. No, it's how does it work? I think so I knew with Anna that I wanted her to be very ordinary, which is something I write about all the time. So all the characters in my book are very, very average people, because I find ordinary people significantly more interesting than secret agents or spies, or I want to write characters that readers can relate to, that could be you, your neighbour, your sister, your co-worker. And so that's my starting point always. And then what happens is I knew that she just had a baby, and then working out how she felt about that baby, who the father was. It just sort of, it builds slowly. I take a lot of long walks, I go swimming at this stage of the novel, and I just let myself think about that character and who they are. And other characters arrive a bit more fully formed. So Murray Mackenzie, who's the police officer that Anna finds to help her, just dropped into my head fully formed. I knew as she walked into the police station who she was about to meet, and I pretty much knew everything about him, and that's never changed.
Do you, because you spent so much time in law enforcement, and you talked earlier about how in real life detective work, when you're unraveling a mystery, the person you're interviewing never gives you a complete narrative arc of how things really happen, and you're really moving pieces around and creating timelines and all of that. Well, in writing this, because you do know how it works in real life, is that a challenge to translate the real life police work to what will be engaging for the reader? And do you wrestle with being completely true to the process versus making it entertaining?
Yeah, there's definitely a balance to be had, because I think sticking too rigidly to the truth, it would just be incredibly boring for a reader. So, and to be honest, my editor's really useful there as well, because if I have a tendency to go too far into detail and jargon, she'll pull me back out of it and say, you could get away with a lighter touch here. But I find that the further I move away from the police, I left the police in 2011, which is, a decent number of years ago now, that actually I'm more likely to employ artistic license and to focus on story rather than accuracy. So I will always make sure that my books feel authentic, but first and foremost, it's a cracking story first.
And a cracking story it is. From the opening chapter all the way through to the end, you will be turning pages, trying to keep up. And are there any techniques that you've learned in writing that help to make a book a page turner? Are there any? I don't want to say tricks, because that sounds cheap. But are there any things that you consciously employ to keep the reader engaged and keep them moving forward?
So changing the point of view, I think, probably helps quite a lot with that. If you're jumping between different perspectives, then there's a sort of inherent pacing that goes with that, because you know that you can leave one person on a bit of a cliffhanger and go to the next one. But with me, actually, the pacing comes mostly with the plotting. So when I plot my books out, and this is something that I do not just at the beginning of a draft, but I'll also do between first and second draft, I will replot my book to make sure everything's in the right place. And I am very low-tech when I do this, so I have a big roll of wallpaper, and lots and lots of, we call them Post-it notes. So they sticky notes,
Yeah.
or I'm not quite sure what
Post-it notes, yeah, we call them Post-it notes.
Okay, fine. So lots of Post-it notes, and I'll have a different color for each person that I'm writing from. And I'll write on the Post-it notes the key scenes that I know I'm going to write, first of all. So the big twists and turns, the big action scenes, and then gradually I'll stick them onto my wallpaper that's pinned up or on a table horizontally. And obviously the scenes on the left are, the early chapters right up to the end. And if it's a scene that is charged with adrenaline, I will put it high up on the page. And if it's one that's what I call a recovery scene, it's sort of slightly slower pace, it'll go down low on the page. And what I should have by the end of my plotting session is a roller coaster. Because on a real roller coaster, if you're up high for too long, then it stops being exciting. And if you're down at the bottom for too long, it's not exciting. What makes it exciting is the contrast between the highs and the lows. And so when I look at this long sheet of wallpaper and all these sticky notes going up and down and up and down, I get an instant visual sense of whether or not the pacing is right. Because if I've got to move them around a bit, if they're up too high, then I know I've got to bring them down a little bit to make sure the reader gets that roller coaster experience.
I absolutely love that. You're absolutely right. If you keep someone's adrenaline pegged out, they're either going to get bored or they're going to have a heart attack, and you're going to lose a reader either way.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it stops being believable.
It does.
If something is too high octane for too long, it almost tips over into farce.
Right. Exactly. Claire, I love this book so much. I am a huge fan. I am going to send everyone to pick up a copy of Let Me Lie. It's out, available everywhere now. Where can people connect with you online if they want to follow along with what's going on? Do you have a website? Are you on social media?
I do. I'm on social media far too much.
Right.
They can find me on Twitter and Facebook. A simple search will bring me up. I also have a book club that people can sign up for. So I send out reading recommendations, competitions, that sort of thing, which is at claremackintosh.com.
Great. Claire, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show, and congratulations on the book launch. I hope it's every bit a success as your previous books.
Thank you so much. It's been great chatting to you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Jason and Joey took their food trays outside and sat high above the parking lot on the secluded stairwell that had become their lunchtime hangout, picking at their Thanksgiving specials and swapping updates. They were almost finished eating before Jason managed to screw up the courage to say what he needed to. "I want to apologize." Joey looked puzzled. "What the hell for?" "Because your coma was my fault." "Yours? The horseman beamed me, you didn't." "Hey, want to see something cool? Look what I found on my phone." Joey produced the device, hit a few buttons, and swiped his finger. An orange circle hung in a field of black, overexposed, something that had been moving fast when the flash caught it. "I was trying to get his picture, right? Like an idiot? Well, I didn't get him, but that is the pumpkin he threw at me." Jason stared at the blurry orange shape for a long time. "Cool. Cool? Can you imagine if we actually got a picture of the Headless Horseman? We'd be famous by now." He pocketed the phone. "Hey, do you want the rest of this turkey? It looks like bologna." "Tastes like bologna, too." He speared the slice anyway. "Look, this is going to sound weird, but I think I made you a target." "What do you mean?" "I made you a target by telling you about my gift. It's some sort of magical rule. If we reveal ourselves to a normal person, whoever we tell becomes a target for ghosts. and usually they die. And you told me anyway? No, I'd already told you. There was no way to untell you. Don't be mad. It all worked out, right? Right? Joey's expression had darkened. Give me a second here. And there's a bright side. What bright side? Now you'll have a gift too. Me? That's what your coma was. Some kind of transition. You got targeted, but you survived. You'll be a founder now, like Ichabod. You'll pass your gift to your kids like he passed his to me. Joey looked worried. What kind of gift will I get? People get gifts that complement their natural abilities. It could be anything. Anything? So, I could read minds? I guess. Turn purple and levitate? Probably not. Something that expresses the essential you. Then I'll have an actor's gift. What's an actor's gift? Jason shrugged. Super narcissism? Shut up. So you're not mad? Joey was shaking with excitement. Mad? This is the coolest thing ever! We'll be like the dynamic duo, fighting supernatural foes up and down the eastern seaboard. Jason laughed, feeling epic relief. I thought you'd be pissed. Nah. What's a little coma between friends? He took a bite out of a Nutter Butter, grinning madly. I'm going to be a superhero. But you can't tell anyone. Why not? Weren't you listening? Everyone we tell dies. You can't talk about your gift to anybody. But if they were targeted and lived, we could have our own X-Men. Yeah, or all your friends could die. Do you want to risk that? No, I guess not. But I don't do closets very well, you know? I came out at conception. Promise to keep it to yourself. Yeah. Joey shifted sideways and walked his sneakers up the brick. So, the essential me. Ooh, I know what gift I'll get. I'll get a singer's gift. What's a singer's gift? Jason shrugged. Superhuman drug tolerance? Shut up!